Symbolic History Through Sight and Sound. 36. The Atomic Age. Frontiers New and Lost. Our searches into the strange euphoria of the post-war world. With what release of spirit Picasso, after the immurement of occupied France, and as the saxophone harmonics of Charlie Parker, miraculous birds sounded the rebirth of jazz. With what release Picasso moved to the Côte d'Azur, with Françoise Gillot, new mistress then wife, for his storm-happiest years, until she broke off with their 2 children in 1952. Though the tensions under all that liberation were to cease on one such sunbathing day, when former model love Dora Maar, also walking the beach, would drive a crucifying heel into the sleeping Françoise' outstretched hand. Had not jazz put off the old chord norms of the humanist claim for an energy as stripped to the radical as in nuclear fire, all particles accelerated? So with Picasso's abstractions, whether of Satyr Delight, this Joie de Vivre, also of 1946, or the converse, its bacchanal held in retrospection. This oil and charcoal summary of world outrage, the charnel house, from a year earlier, painting, as Picasso said, an instrument of war. And in former times, a painting was the result of additions. For me, the painting is the result of destructions. So, by the acid bath of jazz, ghetto squalor, and Parker's addiction turned to rhythmic drive, keen for the abandon of either Picasso extreme. It is the flame leap from no to yes, existentialist Sartre. Man is condemned to be free. Trace that chain reaction of the West. As the 18th century veered toward storm and stress, Wright of Derby reveled in this papal firework. So Goethe, in the Elective Affinities, would seal with a firework festival the fate of his balanced couple, Edward and Charlotte, now drawn like chemicals to Ottilie and the captain. Rockets roared skyward, bombs thundered, fireballs traced the night, squibs coiled and crackled. There were spouting wheels of sparks, crossing and weaving together. Edward, whose heart was afire, fed eager eyes on the spectacle of flame. But to Ottilie's gentle and volatile spirit, this roaring and blinding birth and decay gave less pleasure than pain. And when Turner, learning that the Houses of Parliament were ablaze, 1834, passed the night in ecstatic sketching of that catastrophe, did not the storm topographer of an England veering from Austin to the Brontes also seal the fire compact, as of Liszt's B minor sonata? But Liszt's heavy chords, the spatial rhetoric of even the Turner sketches, bear the Promethean complicity, the half-god struggle of consciousness, which J.H. Miller's Poets of Reality would make a post-romantic syndrome. From Faust and Melville, through Conrad's Heart of Darkness, how many powers of darkness claimed him for their own. Never before did this land, river, jungle, the very arch of the blazing sky, appear so impenetrable to human thought, so pitiless to human reason. Through Yeats of man, ravening, raging, and uprooting, that he may come into the desolation of reality. Down to Eliot, De Bailach, Fresca, Mrs. Camel, whirled beyond the circuit of the shuddering bear in fractured atoms. Such Carrier Ives' attempt at the Civil War burning of Richmond, reaching in Faulkner's Absalom to the combustion of Sutpen's 100. The entire staircase was on fire. Yet they had to hold her, Miss Coldfield, clawing and biting at the two men who dragged her back and down the steps, as the draft created by the open door seemed to explode like powder among the flames, as the whole lower hall vanished. Clytie in that window from which she must have been watching for 3 months, the tragic gnome's face against a background of fire. From such exsufflicate and blown surmises, that war of romantic values, William Carlos Williams seemed to have taken a direction as diametrically opposed as in art that of the ancient Buddhist fire guardians, this 10th century silk painting from Kyoto. So Williams burning the Christmas greens from about 1945, a time as serious as any for fire-death poems. Yet when all that unmistakably symbolic Christmas foliage, green is a solace, a promise of peace, those sure abutments, roars into a landscape of flame, a world, black mountains, black and red, and ash white. In that instant, we break, as Williams, in the college crisis of which long after he would write Marianne Moore, must have broken from programmatic morality and swelling utterance into the inner security of despair. I resigned. I gave up. So in the poem, by a leap of sheer immediacy, we break, breathless to be witnesses, as if we stood, ourselves refreshed, among the shining fauna of that fire. How do the arts of our century attest that transformation? Consider with 3 excerpts from the quartets of Bartók, Miro, early, middle, late. 1917, Man in Pajamas, a first war attack in the mood of Kafka and with the weapons of Van Gogh, expressionist Fauve. From the same year, Bartók's second quartet twists comparable dissonances. By 1924, Dada and the Surreal have led Miro into a shorthand of ironic play, maternity. Left and above, the mother's haired head. Right and below, a skirt pelvis with a displaced hole. 2 children, as in Charity, a bald male below at a profile breast. Above, a girl with hair at a breast full view. These elements tied with calligraphic wire. The vertical crossing a pluck like a floating worm. In Bartók of the 1920s, the pizzicato from the 4th quartet seems to distill such cleverness. Bartók barely lived into the post-war, but his 6th string quartet of 1939, here from the close, has already found, in avant-garde, the mythopoetic renewal of transcendental. And in this Miro red disc of 1960, Dada Rorschach is launched into an orbit of cosmic excitement, as of the death, birth, explosion of a star. Here is the flame tie to William Carlos Williams' effortless acceptance, as if we stood, ourselves refreshed, among the shining fauna of that fire. More than a century before, Blake had hymned regeneration by such blaze. Would he have found it strange that the Second World War, under deepening materialism, and after the disillusions of the first, should grow so yeasty with the now mass ferment, as if this Thomas Dante, entering at the summit of purgatory the liberating fire, poi s'ascose nel fuoco che li affina, were also for our charnel house a passage through the threefold sleep of vegetative Beulah into the fourfold kindling of creative desire. So N.O. Brown's Life Against Death is furiously impelled from its resurrection close toward the chapter sequences of what would become almost a hippie Bible, Love's Body, beyond boundary, through fire and freedom, to the nothing of Cage's silence. And when in Palma, before 1830, Blakean vision touches a Shoreham garden, as Schubert's Ruhen in Frieden aller Seelen loads the litany for the feast of all souls with sensuous promise, the kingdom of love is within you. Again, it is strange, in the pure flame of Bonau's 1946 flowering almond tree, to open the curtains of war and Dachau searing to such a renewal in the shimmering now of modernity. So the close of Britain's war requiem of 1962, so from St. John Paris, the sea marks Amea, finished 1957, its austerity swayed to the groundswell of Blake and Whitman. We who perhaps one day shall die proclaim man as immortal at the flaming heart of the instant, l'homme immortel au foyer de l'instant. But in music, we are confronted not only by an upheaval in the classical tradition. But by the fertile anomaly of jazz, where a primitivism attested from Negroid to pop received world-conquering idiom. By 1947, Pollock had moved into transcendental rapture, this galaxy absorbing Toby's white writing in the cosmic unleashing of I am nature. Also in American poetry, the visionary claim opens to the howl of Ginsberg's 1955 Banana Dock and Rusted Locomotive, with the smog-dried sunflower of that child-affirming sutra. We are not our skin of grime. We are not our dread, bleak, dusty, imageless locomotive. We're all beautiful golden sunflowers inside. We are blessed by our own seed and golden, hairy, naked accomplishment bodies growing into mad, black, formal sunflowers in the sunset, spied on by our eyes under the shadow of the mad locomotive, riverbank, sunset, Frisco, hilly, tin can, evening sit-down vision. Yet who could forget that behind Pollock's star cloud drips lay a violence abstracted, early 1930s top from his realist master Benton, heightening about 1933 center through the impact of Orozco. So through Picasso and the surreal, with African masks and Indian totems, to the fury of the wartime she-wolf below 1943. Could the dance of galactic action sublimate such an explosion of self and world? Benton, of Pollock at art school. Not an exceptional student, incapable of drawing logical sequences, he couldn't be taught anything. Benton, who had begun in Paris 1917, left with awkward abstraction, and then come round, as in this 1938-9 Persephone endangered by gloomy Dis as farmer, to American scene, avant-garde and reaction buffeting each other through the century like Dante's misers and spenders in the fourth circle of hell, Tieni and Burli. Benton, staggered in age by the abstract expressionist outbreak. The art of today is the art of the 1920s, which we repudiated. Had not the 1940 Life collection of American painting pronounced the wave of French modernism had spent its force by late 1929? Benton had voiced the pioneer myth where Pollock began. A windmill, a junk heap, a Rotarian in their American setting have more meaning to me than Notre Dame, the Parthenon, or the heroes of the ages. In his preface and essays 1853 and 65, Matthew Arnold blamed our poetry from Shakespeare down for sacrificing architectonic order to a brilliance of impression, image, effect. It was the Greeks, he says, who understood the poetical character of the action in itself. They regarded the whole, we regard the parts. So it was not our poor, starved, fragmentary, inadequate creation, but criticism, that disinterested endeavor to learn and propagate the best that is known and thought in the world, which must point to such epochs of affirming wholeness, though we shall die in the wilderness. Selene's horse from the Parthenon keeps Olympian repose, even as he sinks restive with the moon chariot into the sea. It is easy to project Arnold backward to the Greeks. The fourth ode of Sophocles' Antigone, Fitz and Fitzgerald. She raced with young colts on the glittering hills, and walked untrammeled in the open light. But in her marriage deathless fate found means to build a tomb like yours for all her joy. Hard to apply him forward. What would he have condemned? What allowed? If spirit builds against entropy, it is by complicity with flame, whether in Greek tragedy or the atomic West. And what if abstraction, fragmenting the wholeness Arnold desired, might purge the sickness he deplored, that private loss become a laughter to the gods? What Arnold invoked is the oldest polarity of thought and perception, from Heraclitus to Plato, one and many, form and flux. It was the field in which Pollock came to the breakthrough of his drips, as if the interweaving line of the Book of Kells, of Leonardo's branchings in the Sforzesca ceiling, had been seized on to compose a personal agony. Yet how could the triumphal abandon of that apocalyptic wallpaper, in euphoric balance from 1947 to 50, this significantly entitled number 1 above, exorcise the frustrations it rooted in? Inaction would recur, with works of fiercer struggle, this search below, his last, before he challenged death on a dark road. Was the consuming passion of the New York school the simultaneous overthrow and mastery of form in flux? Cézanne, archetypal modern, began before 1860 with a classical commitment like Arnold's. This oil mural, found under the wallpaper in the Jardin de Buffon, then being built by Cézanne's father, leans to the style the Carracci and Claude received from late Renaissance. It was a love which would affect music, from Mendelssohn's Midsummer Night's Dream Nocturne to our time. But Cézanne, through the 60s, countered the classical with as lurid a violence as any of the Russians. Here from the first movement of Borodin's Second Symphony. Would Arnold have heightened the condemnation he made of his own Empedocles against a morbid distress without catharsis, of which the representation is painful, not tragic? Marvelous how Impressionism, absorbed into Cézanne's ground of primitive force, houses the Poussin dream, but in a fabric of always more daring modernity. Surely the great calm paintings of the 80s, this Mont Sainte-Victoire, confront Arnold with radical recovery of classical dignity. In music, the third movement of the Borodin Second is at least comparably aimed, while the abstract imperative in fiction must have pushed Tolstoy to War and Peace, Melville to Moby Dick and Billy Budd. But Cézanne continued up to the year of his death in 1906, the more shimmeringly cubistic analysis of Mont Sainte-Victoire. In this rendition, perhaps his last, the dissolution of forms in a quilt of color binds flux itself into compositional patterns, startling as the new mathematics from Lobachevsky through Riemann, Dedekind, Cantor, Hilbert to Russell and Whitehead, while the same Borodin symphony moves in the last movement toward a comparable suspension of tonality. Already such aerobatics, stars, euphoria. Meanwhile, the 14-year-old Picasso had begun, 1895, with his first communion left, against which we set from 73 years later, 4 years before the artist's death, an oil sketch called Large Heads. Here the demolitions of world and art have come, in Nietzsche's phrase, as a cleansing wind to the romantic charnel house, blasting its sentimental verisimilitudes. After 2 wars, with totalitarianism, earth rape, and nuclear juggling, paradox and indignity fuse in the death life of energy. Would that tragic return have pleased or troubled the author of Dover Beach? For the clinging heart's miasma that wind had to clear away, let Franz von Stuck's Evening Star, with Mahler's early Songs of a Wanderer, join the clandestine brew of Browning's Porphyria's Lover, and made her smooth white shoulder bare, and all her yellow hair displaced, and stooping made my cheek lie there, to curdle in Meredith's Modern Love. Ah, what a dusty answer gets the soul when sick for certainties in this our life. Von Stuck's lighted house on the horizon left among trees, the stream along which a wife surely and lover have walked to kiss in the glow of Venus, Such visceral fullness as Mahler drew from Brahms and Bruckner fills a bog of romantic identification, where tragedy drowns in wish and waste. By 1900, in Picasso left, the embrace shifts to a public street, shedding romantic resonances, nature, morality, poetic ideals, a detachment which, with Brancusi's 1912 kiss, achieves physiochemical crystallization. Is this minimally altered block of stone right, carved in earnest, irony, or play? Such indulgences have been erased. So in Webern's 1913 Bagatelles, attenuation of melody and chord precludes the moods of Mahler. Even O'Neill thought in Morning Becomes Electra to see the transfiguring nobility of tragedy in as near the Greek sense as one can grasp it, though his lacerations wind the gut out on a spool, staring into the sunlight with frozen eyes. Here, before the First World War, that feedback howl was damped, though Arnold's Greek baby may have gone out with the bath. In the post-war indeterminacies of graphic music, Morton Feldman's false relationships and the extended ending. In the huge stained canvas improvisations of Helen Frankenthaler, we find ourselves spaced out from the old human condition. If this 1957 Eden, by its Love Garden title and playful 100-100 calligraphy, is that God caught above red-handed? Plays at passion. Passion's involvement has melted away, albeit in a world of Cold War, Silent Spring, Korea, Vietnam. In early Gothic, iconographic distance had been as automatic as the suspension of earthly loves in ascetic